The Golden Brain. Alphonse Daudet's Lettres de mon Moulin includes a story that may sound rather bizarre, but nevertheless has much in common with what I have presented here. I shall summarize the story briefly. Once upon a time there was a child who had a golden brain. His parents only discovered this by chance when he injured his head and gold instead of blood flowed out. They then began to look after him carefully and would not let him play with other children for fear of being robbed. When the boy was grown up and wanted to go out into the world, his mother said, "We have done so much for you, we ought to be able to share your wealth." Then her son took a large piece of gold out of his brain and gave it to his mother. He lived in great style with a friend who, however, robbed him one night and ran away. After that, the man resolved to guard his secret and to go out to work, because his reserves were visibly dwindling. One day he fell in love with a beautiful girl who loved him too, but no more than the beautiful clothes he gave her so lavishly. He married her and was very happy, but after 2 years she died, and he spent the rest of his wealth on her funeral, which had to be splendid. Once, as he was creeping through the streets, weak, poor, and unhappy, he saw a beautiful little pair of boots that would have been perfect for his wife. He forgot that she was dead, perhaps because his emptied brain no longer worked, and entered the shop to buy the boots. But in that very moment he fell, and the shopkeeper saw a dead man lying on the ground. Daudet, who was to die from an illness of the spinal cord, wrote following this story. This story sounds as though it were invented, but it is true from beginning to end. There are people who have to pay for the smallest things in life with their very substance and their spinal cord. That is a constantly recurring pain, and then when they are tired of suffering. Does not mother love belong to the smallest, but also indispensable, things in life, for which many people paradoxically have to pay by giving up their living selves? Chapter 2. Depression and Grandiosity. Two related forms of denial. The vicissitudes of the child's needs. Every child has a legitimate need to be noticed, understood, taken seriously, and respected by his mother. In the first weeks and months of life, he needs to have the mother at his disposal, must be able to avail himself of her and be mirrored by her. This is beautifully illustrated in one of Donald Winnicott's images. The mother gazes at the baby in her arms, and the baby gazes at his mother's face and finds himself therein. Provided that the mother is really looking at the unique, small, helpless being, and not projecting her own expectations, fears, and plans for the child. In that case, the child would not find himself in his mother's face, but rather the mother's own projections. This child would remain without a mirror, and for the rest of his life would be seeking this mirror in vain. Healthy development. If a child is lucky enough to grow up with a mirroring, available mother who is at the child's disposal, that is, a mother who allows herself to be made use of as a function of the child's development, then a healthy self-feeling can gradually develop in the growing child. Ideally, this mother should also provide the necessary emotional climate and understanding for the child's needs. But even a mother who is not especially warm-hearted can make this development possible, if only she refrains from preventing it and allows the child to acquire from other people what she herself lacks. Various studies have shown the incredible ability a child displays in making use of the smallest effective nourishment, stimulation, to be found in his surroundings. I understand a healthy self-feeling to mean the unquestioned certainty that the feelings and needs one experiences are a part of one's self. This certainty is not something one can gain upon reflection. It is there like one's own pulse, which one does not notice as long as it functions normally. The automatic, natural contact with his own emotions and needs give an individual strength and self-esteem. He may experience his feelings, sadness, despair, or the need for help, without fear of making the mother insecure. He can allow himself to be afraid when he is threatened, angry when his wishes are not fulfilled. He knows not only what he does not want, but also what he wants, and is able to express his wants, irrespective of whether he will be loved or hated for it. If a woman is to give her child what he will need throughout his life, it is absolutely fundamental that she not be separated from her newborn, for the hormones that foster and nourish her motherly instinct are released immediately after birth, and continue in the following days and weeks as she grows more familiar with her baby. When a newborn is separated from his mother, which was the rule not so long ago in maternity hospitals and still occurs in the majority of cases, out of ignorance and for the sake of convenience, then a great opportunity is missed for both mother and child. The bonding, through skin and eye contact, between mother and baby after birth stimulates in both of them the feeling that they belong together, a feeling of oneness that ideally has been growing from the time of conception. The infant is given the sense of safety he needs to trust his mother, and the mother receives the instinctive reassurance that will help her understand and answer her child's messages. This initial mutual intimacy can never again be created, and its absence can be a serious obstacle right from the start. The crucial significance of bonding has only recently been proved scientifically. One hopes that it will soon be taken into account in practice, not only in a few select maternity hospitals, but in larger hospitals as well, so that everyone will benefit from it. A woman who has experienced bonding with her child will be in less danger of mistreating him and will be in a better position to protect him from mistreatment by the father and other caregivers, such as teachers and babysitters. Even a woman whose own repressed history has been responsible for a lack of bonding with her child can later help him overcome this deficit if she comes to understand its significance. She will also be able to compensate for the consequences of a difficult birth if she does not minimize their importance and knows that a child who was heavily traumatized at the beginning of his life will be in particular need of care and attention in order to overcome the fears arising out of more recent experiences. The disturbance. What happens if a mother not only is unable to recognize and fulfill her child's needs, but is herself in need of assurance? Quite unconsciously, the mother then tries to assuage her needs through her own child. This does not rule out strong affection. The mother often loves her child passionately, but not in the way he needs to be loved. The reliability, continuity, and constancy that are so important for the child are therefore missing from this exploitative relationship. What is missing above all is the framework within which the child could experience his feelings and emotions. Instead, he develops something the mother needs, and although this certainly saves his life, by securing the mother or the father's love at the time, it may nevertheless prevent him throughout his life from being himself. In such cases, the natural needs appropriate to the child's age cannot be integrated, so they are repressed or split off. This person will later live in the past without realizing it and will continue to react to past dangers as if they were present. People who have asked for my assistance because of their depression have usually had to deal with a mother who was extremely insecure and who often suffered from depression herself. The child, most often an only child or the firstborn, was seen as the mother's possession. What the mother had once failed to find in her own mother, she was able to find in her child. Someone at her disposal who could be used as an echo and could be controlled, who was completely centered on her, would never desert her, and offered her full attention and admiration. If the child's demands became too great, as those of her own mother once did, she was no longer so defenseless. She could refuse to allow herself to be tyrannized. She could bring the child up in such a way that he neither cried nor disturbed her. At last she could make sure that she received consideration, care, and respect. Barbara, a mother of 4 children, at 35 had only scanty memories of her childhood relationship with her mother. At the beginning of treatment, she described her as an affectionate, warm-hearted woman who spoke to her openly about her own troubles at an early age, who was very concerned for her children, and who sacrificed herself for her family. She was often asked for advice by others within the sect to which the family belonged. Barbara reported that her mother had always been especially proud of her. The mother was now old and an invalid, and the patient was very concerned about her health. She often dreamed that something had happened to her mother and woke up with great anxiety. As a consequence of the emotions that arose in Barbara through therapy, this picture of her mother changed. Above all, when memories of toilet training entered her consciousness, she experienced her mother as demanding, controlling, manipulative, cold, petty, obsessive, easily offended, and hard to please. Many subsequent childhood memories of her mother confirmed these characteristics. Barbara was then able to connect with the real reasons for her long-suppressed anger and to discover what her mother was really like. She realized that when her mother had felt insecure in relation to her, she had in fact often been cold and had treated her badly. The mother's anxious concern for the child had served to ward off her aggression and envy. Since the mother had often been humiliated as a child, she needed to be valued by her daughter. Barbara experienced in therapy for the first time the agonizing fear and rage she had to repress when she was 10 years old and came home from school on her mother's birthday to find her lying on the floor with closed eyes. The child cried out, thinking her mother was dead. The mother then opened her eyes and said, delighted, "You gave me the most precious birthday gift. Now I know that you love me, that somebody loves me." For decades, pity and compassion hindered Barbara from realizing the cruelty with which she had been treated. Triggered by a later event, this memory could finally emerge, accompanied by feelings of rage and indignation. Gradually, the different pictures of the mother were united into that of a single human being whose weakness, insecurity, and oversensitivity made her do everything she could to keep her child at her disposal. The mother, who apparently functioned well with others, was herself basically still a child, cut off from her real emotions. The daughter, on the other hand, took over the understanding and caring role until she discovered, with her own children, her previously ignored needs. Before she recognized the story of her past, she had been compelled to press her children into her service, as her mother had done. The illusion of love. Over the years, my work has included many initial consultations with people whom I saw for 1 or 2 sessions before referring them to a colleague. In these short encounters, the tragedy of an individual history can often be seen with moving clarity. In what is described as depression and experienced as emptiness, futility, fear of impoverishment, and loneliness can usually be recognized as the tragic loss of the self in childhood, manifested as the total alienation from the self in the adult. I have witnessed various mixtures and nuances of so-called narcissistic disturbances. For the sake of clarity, I shall describe 2 extreme forms, of which I consider one to be the reverse of the other: grandiosity and depression. Behind manifest grandiosity there constantly lurks depression, and behind a depressive mood there often hides an unconscious, or conscious but split off, sense of a tragic history. In fact, grandiosity is the defense against depression, and depression is the defense against the deep pain over the loss of the self that results from denial. Grandiosity. The person who is grandiose is admired everywhere and needs this admiration. Indeed, he cannot live without it. He must excel brilliantly in everything he undertakes, which he is surely capable of doing, otherwise he just does not attempt it. He, too, admires himself for his qualities, his beauty, cleverness, talents, and for his success and achievements. Beware if one of these fails him, for then the catastrophe of a severe depression is imminent. It is usually considered normal when sick or aged people who have suffered the loss of much of their health and vitality, or women who are experiencing menopause, become depressive. There are, however, many people who can tolerate the loss of beauty, health, youth, or loved ones, and, although they grieve, do so without depression. In contrast, there are those with great gifts, often precisely the most gifted, who do suffer from severe depression. For one is free from it only when self-esteem is based on the authenticity of one's own feelings and not on the possession of certain qualities. The collapse of self-esteem in a grandiose person will show clearly how precariously that self-esteem has been hanging in the air, hanging from a balloon, as a patient once dreamed. That balloon flew up very high in a good wind, but was suddenly punctured, and soon lay like a little rag on the ground, for nothing genuine that could have been given inner strength and support had ever been developed. In a field study conducted at Chestnut Lodge, Maryland, in 1954, the family's background of 12 patients suffering from manic depressive psychosis were examined. The results strongly confirm the conclusions I have reached, by other means, about the etiology of depression. All the patients came from families who were socially isolated and felt themselves to be too little respected in their neighborhood. They therefore made special efforts to increase their prestige with their neighbors through conformity and outstanding achievements. The child who later became ill had been assigned a special role in this effort. He was supposed to guarantee the family honor and was loved only in proportion to the degree to which he was able to fulfill the demands of this family. He was supposed to guarantee the family honor and was loved only in proportion to the degree to which he was able to fulfill the demands of this family ideal by means of his special abilities, talents, his beauty, etc. If he failed, he was punished by being cold-shouldered or thrown out of the family group and by the knowledge that he had brought great shame on his people. With today's mobility of families and family members, adapting to a different ethnic culture is essential to survival, but it is threatening to the child's autonomy. Unfortunately, the only alternative seems to be a clinging to or return to fundamentalism. Without therapy, it is impossible for the grandiose person to cut the tragic link between admiration and love. He seeks insatiably for admiration, of which he never gets enough, because admiration is not the same thing as love. It is only a substitute gratification of the primary needs for respect, understanding, and being taken seriously, needs that have remained unconscious since early childhood. Often a whole life is devoted to this substitute. As long as the true need is not felt and understood, the struggle for the symbol of love will continue. It is for this very reason that an aging, world-famous photographer who had received many international awards could say to an interviewer, "I've never felt what I have done was good enough." And he does not question why he has felt this way. Apparently, it has never occurred to him that the depression he reports could be related to his fusion with the demands of his parents. A patient once spoke of the feeling of always having to walk on stilts. It is somebody who always has to walk on stilts, not bound to be constantly envious of those who can walk on their own legs, even if they seem to him to be smaller and more ordinary than he is himself. And is he not bound to carry pent-up rage within himself against those who have made him afraid to walk without stilts? He could also be envious of healthy people because they do not have to make a constant effort to earn admiration, and because they do not have to do something in order to impress, one way or the other, but are free to be average. The grandiose person is never really free. First, because he is excessively dependent on admiration from others, and second, because his self-respect is dependent on qualities, functions, and achievements that can suddenly fail. Depression as the reverse of grandiosity. In many of the patients I have known, depression was coupled with grandiosity in many ways. 1. Depression sometimes appeared when grandiosity broke down as a result of sickness, disablement, or aging. In the case of an unmarried woman, external sources of approval gradually dried up as she grew older. She no longer received constant confirmation of her attractiveness, which earlier had served a directly supportive function as a substitute for the missing mirroring by her mother. Superficially, her despair about getting old seemed to be due to the absence of sexual contacts, but, at a deeper level, early fears of being abandoned were now aroused, and this woman had new conquests with which to counteract them. All her substitute mirrors were broken. She again stood helpless and confused, as the small girl once did before her mother's face, in which she found not herself but only her mother's confusion. Men often experience becoming older in a similar way, even if a new love affair may seem to create the illusion of their youth for a time and may in this way introduce brief manic phases into the early stages of the depression brought to the surface by their aging. 2. In the combination of alternating phases of grandiosity and depression, their common ground can be recognized. There are the two sides of a medal that can be described as the false self, a medal that was once actually won for achievement. For example, at the height of his success, an actor can play before an enthusiastic audience and experience feelings of heavenly greatness and almightiness. Nevertheless, his sense of emptiness and futility, even of shame and anger, can return the next morning if his happiness and previous night was not only due to his creative activity in playing and expressing the part, but was also, and above all, rooted in the substitute satisfaction of old needs for echoing, mirroring, and being seen and understood. If his success the previous night serves only to deny childhood frustrations, then, like every substitute, it can bring only momentary satisfaction. In fact, true satisfaction is no longer possible, since the right time for that now lies irrevocably in the past. The former child no longer exists, nor do the former parents. The present parents, if they are still alive, are now old and dependent. They no longer have any power over their son, and are perhaps delighted with his success, and with his infrequent visits. In the present, the son enjoys success and recognition, but these things cannot offer him more than their present value. They cannot fill the old gap. Again, as long as he is able to deny this need with the help of illusion, that is, with the intoxication of success, the old wound cannot heal. Depression leaves him close to his wounds, but only mourning for what he has missed at the crucial time, can lead to real healing. 3. Continuous performance of outstanding achievements may sometimes enable a person to maintain the illusion of the constant attention and availability of his parents, whose absence from his early childhood he now denies just as thoroughly as his own emotional reactions. Such a person is usually able to ward off threatening depression with increased displays of brilliance, thereby deceiving both himself and those around him. However, he quite often chooses a marriage partner who either already has strong depressive traits or, at least within their marriage, unconsciously takes over and enacts the depressive components of the grandiose partner. The depression is thus kept outside, and the grandiose one can look after his poor partner, protect her like a child, feel strong and indispensable, and thus gain another supporting pillar for the building of his own personality. Actually, however, that personality has no secure foundation and is dependent on the supporting pillars of success, achievement, strength, and above all, the denial of the emotional world of his childhood. Although the outward picture of depression is quite the opposite of that of grandiosity, and has a quality that expresses the tragedy of the loss of self in a more obvious way, they have many points in common. A false self that is led to the loss of the potential true self, a fragility of self-esteem because of a lack of confidence in one's own feelings and wishes, perfectionism, denial of rejected feelings, a preponderance of exploitative relationships, an enormous fear of loss in love, and therefore a great readiness to conform, split-off aggression, oversensitivity, a readiness to feel shame and guilt, restlessness.